Hello there, and welcome to the Dozing Scholars channel. Tonight, we'll be discussing the history of money, how it started, the changes it made throughout the years, and how it affects us even to this day. Whether you're here to learn, relax, or sleep, I hope you have a great time watching this video. Now, let us begin. I want you to picture this. It's late. Your room is quiet, not completely silent, but the kind of quiet where everything feels softer. You're sitting at a desk, or maybe lying in bed, and somewhere nearby, there's your phone or your wallet. Inside it, there's money, not much maybe, or maybe more than you think, but it's there. Numbers on a screen, or notes folded in leather, or coins resting quietly at the bottom. You don't question it, you don't stop to think about it, it's just there, ready to be used, ready to be spent. But if you slow down, just for a moment, something about it becomes a little strange. Because that money has no real value on its own. The paper is just paper, the metal is just metal, and the numbers are just light on a screen. And yet, somehow, it works. You can exchange it for food, for objects, for time, for effort, for almost anything. That's unusual, isn't it? Why does this work? Why do we all agree that this thing has value? And more importantly, how did we get here? Because money wasn't always like this. In fact, for most of human history, it didn't exist at all. What you're holding, or what's sitting quietly nearby, is the result of thousands of years of small changes, slow ideas, and moments of quiet invention. But here's the surprising truth. Money isn't really a thing. It's a story. A shared belief that only works because everyone agrees it does. Tonight, we're going to follow that story slowly, from the very beginning to where it is now. From simple trade to coins to paper to something you can't even hold. And as we go, you might start to notice that money is far stranger than it first appears. So settle in, there's no rush. Just let the story unfold. To understand money, we first have to imagine a world without it, a world where nothing had a fixed price, no numbers, no coins, no notes, no balances, just people and the things they had. Imagine standing in a small market, long before cities, long before banks, long before anything we would recognize today. The air is warm, there's movement around you, voices, low and constant. People are trading, some even negotiating, trying to exchange what they have for what they need. You have something with value, maybe grain that was grown slowly over months of work, maybe cloth that was woven carefully by hand, maybe tools shaped with time and effort. But you need something else, a pot, a blade, a different kind of tool, something you cannot easily make yourself. So you begin to search, not just for someone who has what you need, but someone who also wants exactly what you have. And that is where the problem begins, because most of the time, that person simply isn't there. they might need something else, or nothing at all, or they might already have too much of what you're offering. So you wait, you walk, you ask, you negotiate, you try to adjust the trade, just a little more grain for a slightly better tool, or less cloth for something a bit smaller. And slowly, trade becomes less about value and more about coincidence. This problem would later be given a name, the double coincidence of wants. But at the time, it was simply frustrating and slow and definitely uncertain, and sometimes impossible. So people began to look for something better. Not a perfect solution, just something easier. Something that most people would accept, even if they didn't need it immediately. And slowly, certain objects began to take on that role. Salt was one of the earliest. It was valuable because it preserved food, and it was essential for survival. In some places, salt became so important that it was used as payment, even by soldiers, which is where the word salary comes from. Grain was used too. It was stored, carefully measured, and most importantly, it was shared. Shells in coastal regions were small, durable, and easy to carry. Cattle in some societies represented wealth, but it was just too difficult to divide. Each of these things contained real value. Think about it. You could eat them, use them, and depend on them. But they weren't perfect. Some were too heavy, some spoiled, some were difficult to transport, some were hard to measure fairly. And so the search continued, quietly, slowly, over generations. Until eventually, something new appeared, not food, not tools, not even something you could use directly, but something simpler, something small, and something consistent. Metal. And more importantly, metal shaped into something new, something standardized, something recognizable, and something you didn't have to argue about. That's where the next part of the story begins. Around 600 BCE, in a lovely place called Lydia, something quiet but remarkable began to take shape. Lydia sat in what is now Western Turkey, a beautiful region of hills and rivers, and most importantly, slow-moving trade routes. Running through this land was a river called the Pactolus. At first, it seemed like any other river. Water was flowing and stones were shifting, nothing out of the ordinary. But beneath the surface, there was something different. A natural substance that was carried along by the current, a mixture of gold and silver. This material was known as electrum. It was absolutely beautiful, softly reflective, slightly golden, and slightly pale. But more importantly, it was valuable. But there was a problem. No two pieces were exactly the same. Some had more gold, whilst other had more silver. Some were heavier, whilst some were slightly lighter. And this made trade very difficult. Because if you wanted to exchange it, you had to weigh it and examine it, not to mention the countless arguments over its worth. Every single time. And slowly, that became a problem worth solving. So the people of Lydia did something new. They took this metal and shaped it, not into random pieces, but into consistent forms. Small, rounded, and recognizable. And then they stamped them, each piece marked carefully with a symbol. Often under the rule of King Alyattes, a ruler whose authority had extended across the region, and that mark meant something powerful. It meant that this currency has been measured, it has been verified, and the kingdom stands behind it. For the first time, Value became standardized. You didn't need to weigh metal, and you did not need to argue over quality. You just needed to trust the stamp. And that trust was not abstract. It wasn't gentle. It was enforced. Because behind every coin was power. Behind every mark was authority. And behind that authority was an army. So when you accepted a coin, you weren't just accepting metal. You were accepting a system, a shared agreement that was backed by force. And something very interesting happened. People actually began to trust it, not instantly, but gradually. Coin by coin, trade by trade. Because it made things easier, made things faster, and made things more predictable. And once that shift began, it didn't stay in Lydia. The idea spread across neighboring regions into Greece and then beyond. Other societies adopted it, built on top of it, and then expanded it. Coins became more detailed, more uniformed, and more widely accepted. Then something subtle changed. Money was no longer just useful, it became symbolic. A coin could carry the face of a ruler, a message, and a statement of control. It could travel far beyond its origin, reaching places the ruler would never see, and wherever it went, it said the same thing. This has value. This is accepted. This is real. But even then, something deeper remained, because the coin itself was still just metal. Its power came from something else, something that was less visible, something shared. Trust. And that idea would become even more important in the next part of the story. If coins were a shift, then paper money was something else entirely. Because a coin, at the very least, had weight. You could actually feel it, hold it, and turn it in your hand. It was metal, something physical, and something with real value. Paper was much different. It was light and thin. It could be easily folded and easily lost. And yet, in ancient China, people began to trust it. During the Tang dynasty, around the 7th century, trade was growing at a rapid rate. Routes stretched further, and journeys became much longer. Goods were being moved across vast distances. And merchants began to face a familiar problem, not with value, but with weight. Coins were extremely heavy, not just one or two, but hundreds and thousands, carried in bags, pulled along roads, counted and recounted. With that weight came a great risk, the risk of theft and the risk of loss, the risk of simply being slowed down, wasting time. So a quiet solution began to appear. Merchants would arrive in a city and deposit their coins with someone they trusted, a local agent or a merchant, someone who was just established, and in return, they would receive something simple, a small piece of paper, a record, a note. It said how much they had left behind. That paper could then be carried instead. It was light and portable, almost effortless to hold. And when they reached their destination, they could exchange it for the same value. The coins stayed still, but the paper moved. The Chinese called this flying money, because unlike coins, it could travel as fast as the person carrying it. At first, this system depended entirely on trust. Trust not only in the person holding the coins, but trust in the promise written on the paper. And for a time, that was enough. But as trade grew, so did the scale of the idea. Eventually, the government began to take notice. During the Song dynasty, something important changed. The state took control. They began issuing official paper money, not private notes or personal promises, but currency. It was called jiaozi. And for the very first time in history, money existed, with no intrinsic value at all. No gold, no silver, and no metal, just ink and paper and a promise. But people were not comfortable with this. In fact, many were deeply suspicious because a coin felt real. It had weight and it had a certain presence. Paper felt fragile and temporary. You couldn't melt it down and you couldn't reshape it. Its material could not be relied on. It depended entirely on belief. And belief can be fragile. If people trust it, it works. But if they don't, it collapses. And yet, despite that uncertainty, paper money endured because it solved something important. It removed weight, it increased speed, and it made trade easier. Slowly, over time, people had adjusted. What once felt unnatural became familiar. What once felt risky became normal, and the idea spread across regions, across cultures, across centuries, until eventually paper money became something people expected, not questioned or doubted, just used. But underneath that acceptance, something deeper remained, because paper money was never about the paper. It was about the promise, and that promise would be tested again in the next part of the story. For a long time, paper money was not alone. Behind it, quietly, somewhere out of sight, there was something else: gold. Not in your hand and not in your wallet, but stored away. It was locked, counted, and guarded. The idea was pretty simple. If you had paper money, you could exchange it for gold. Not always easily and not always instantly, but in theory, it was possible. The paper was a claim, a promise, and a representation of something that was real. This system became known as the gold standard, and for a time it worked because it gave people confidence. If you didn't trust the paper, you could trust the gold behind it. It acted like an anchor that held the system steady. But as the world changed, that anchor became harder to maintain. Economies grew larger and trade expanded. Money was moving faster, and slowly the link between paper and gold began to stretch. After the Second World War, a new system was created, an agreement between countries and a way to stabilize global trade. It became known as the Bretton Woods system. Under this system, many currencies were linked to the US dollar, and the US dollar was directly linked to gold. This meant that indirectly, everything still pointed back to something physical. But over time, pressure built. More money was needed, and the gold was no longer enough to support it all. Then, in 1971, something changed. It was quiet but permanent. On August 15th, President Richard Nixon spoke on television. His tone was calm and measured, but the decision was significant. He announced that the United States would no longer exchange dollars for gold. The link was broken. Not temporarily and not partially, but completely. And with that, the system changed. The dollar, and eventually most currencies in the world, were no longer backed by gold. They were backed by something else. Trust. Not gold in a vault or metal in reserve, just belief. Belief that the system would hold. Belief that others would accept it. Belief that it still meant something. And surprisingly, it worked. In all fairness, it still works, because money has never really been about gold or silver or even paper. It has always been about agreement and a shared understanding, a quiet, collective decision to believe the same thing. And so, money, from salt to metal to paper to something you can't even hold, turns out to be something very unusual. It's not just a tool and not just a system, but it's a story, one that has been told and retold for thousands of years. A story that only works because everyone agrees to keep telling it. And next time you see it, whether it be in your hand or on a screen, you might notice something different. Not just value, but belief. Not just numbers, but trust. And maybe, even if it's for a moment, it will feel a little quieter, a little simpler. A small idea that is shared by billions is holding everything together. Thank you for watching this video. If you are here to sleep, then I hope you found rest. If you are here to learn, then I hope you found knowledge. And if you are here to relax, I hope you found relaxation. This is the Dozing Scholar signing off. Goodbye, everyone.